You gave up on yourself. You were sincere. You believed that your devotion would be enough to keep someone by your side. And yet, she turned her back. The emptiness left behind is not just the silence of someone who has gone, it is the echo of an old wound that starts bleeding again. The pain you feel now did not begin with her, but it was reignited by her. And that is what makes it so devastating. It is not merely the loss of a woman, but the return of every moment when you believed you were not chosen. Men rarely talk about this, but they carry the weight of rejection in silence, year after year. When she left, the blow did not only come from the present, it came from the unhealed past. That is why many confuse longing with love. What you think is missing her is often just the absence of the validation you projected onto her. She left, but what truly torments you is the feeling that, once again, you were not enough. This is the harsh reality few dare to confront. You are not mourning her, you are mourning the version of yourself that you believed would finally be recognized through her. The brain, conditioned by the need for acceptance, creates a powerful illusion that the only way to ease the pain is to win back the one who left. It is the addiction to being chosen. And like any addiction, it distorts perception. You start believing you need her to breathe, when in truth you are trying to inhale through a tube that has already been pulled out. What no one told you is that this process has a biological explanation. Dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, all of it mixed in doses that created emotional dependence. But it was not her you were dependent on. It was the sensation of being seen, recognized, validated. It was the role she played in your inner narrative. She was not just a woman. She was the mirror where you tried to see yourself as a man. And so, when she left, the pain was not just about her absence, but about losing that mirror. Yet there is something you must understand with clarity. The true matter at stake is not winning a woman back. It is reclaiming yourself. Every time you cling to someone who no longer wishes to stay, you distance yourself from the only power that really matters, the power to choose again. That is what separates men trapped in cycles of pain from those who finally awaken to a higher level of awareness. And perhaps it feels uncomfortable to hear this now, but it is precisely this rupture that opens the door to growth. Because when you stop seeking validation outside, you realize it has always been available within. When you stop fighting to be chosen, that is when you finally begin to choose. That is the journey we are going to explore. Not to soothe your pain, not to pretend the emptiness does not exist, but to reveal the truth hidden behind the story you told yourself. The truth that letting go is not losing. It is reclaiming. The invisible pain, the void she left is not hers. It is the echo of your own wound. When she left, you believed the pain was her absence, as if the world had lost an irreplaceable piece. But in silence, what truly opened was the old wound you never dared face head-on. The fear of rejection, the fear of not being enough, the fear of always being the one left behind. This is the point many men fail to see. The pain of loss does not come from the present. It is anchored in dormant memories. As a child, perhaps you felt unnoticed, abandoned by those who should have protected you, unfairly compared, always second place. These scars remain hidden until a new rejection makes them bleed again. What you think is missing her is often just missing a validation that never came. So when she walked away, you did not cry only for the woman who left. You cried for the boy who was never chosen for the school game. For the teenager who was invisible to the girl he dreamed of. For the man who, even when giving everything, still felt it was never enough. This accumulation is what makes rejection so devastating. It is not about now. It is the sum of all yesterdays returning at once. The male brain interprets this loss as a threat to identity. Her absence seems like a silent verdict. You are not worthy. But that is the trick of a conditioned mind. You projected onto her the role of confirming your worth. And when she left, she did not just take her body. She took away the mirror in which you thought you saw your importance. That is the true invisible pain. Not losing someone, but losing the reflection of yourself. There is a deeper layer still. When you feel that crushing longing, it is not her you miss. It is the sensation of belonging, of being seen, of believing, if only for a moment, that you were complete. The paradox is cruel. The same woman who once brought you that sensation was also the one who took it away. That is what creates the cycle of obsession. Because the brain tries to recover in the same place what it itself associated with loss. It is like looking for water in a dry well. And as you insist on revisiting the memories, asking yourself where you went wrong, the wound deepens further. Each recollection is not relief, but a renewed cut. You relive conversations, moments of affection, loaded silences, as if answers were hidden there. But the answer is not in the past you shared. It is in the origin of this need to be recognized. That is where liberation begins. When you understand the emptiness is not hers. It is yours. This understanding must not be seen as condemnation, but as clarity. When pain has a name, it ceases to be an invisible monster. When you realize it is not her, you miss, but the validation you projected onto her, you begin to see the mistake in the pattern. And that is when the wound becomes a path. Because if the pain was born in you, the cure has always been within you too. The hidden mechanism. The addiction to being chosen. That is what binds you, far more than any memory of her. You do not see it, but your brain works like a chemical laboratory, producing substances that shape your feelings and decisions. When you were with her, every message, every smile, every touch released dopamine, a promise of reward. And this promise, more than the reality itself, is what becomes addictive. Love, in the way most people understand it, is often confused with attachment. And attachment is fed by fear. It is not her who keeps you bound. It is the unconscious need to prove you are worthy. Your body reacts like an addict in withdrawal, desperate for another dose. Her absence is not just emotional, it is also chemical. The dopamine that once came with closeness now turns into anxiety, insomnia, obsession. This is the hidden mechanism. You do not weep only for the loss, but for the collapse of a biochemical cycle. The brain, desperate to repeat patterns, insists on going back to the place where the reward used to be. That is why you reread old messages, revisit photographs, replay memories. It is not rational. It is biological. But this biological process rests on something deeper. The emotional programming of believing your worth depends on being chosen. From early on, men are conditioned to associate external recognition with self-worth. A mother's praise, a father's approval, a teacher's attention, a girlfriend's affection. Each small validation becomes a stamp of I exist. The problem is that when the stamp is denied, the sensation is annihilation. You've never learned to sustain your value on your own. You learned to depend on others' gaze to confirm your identity. And every time someone leaves, your whole world collapses with them. This is why so many men confuse pain with love. You are not suffering for the woman herself, but for the feeling of once again being stripped of validation. When she chose you, you felt alive, desired, recognized. When she stopped choosing you, it felt like being erased. The cruel logic is this: the more you need to be seen, the more blind you become to your own power. And here lies the strategic truth. As long as you believe value comes from being chosen, you will always be hostage to someone's gaze. Real power does not come from being noticed, but from understanding your identity exists without witnesses. Once you break this cycle, everything changes. Desire does not vanish, but it no longer commands. Longing does not disappear, but it no longer dominates. You remain human, but no longer a slave to the chemistry that chained you to someone who is no longer there. Emotional dependency is, therefore, an invisible prison. It has no physical bars, but chemical and emotional chains that keep you on your knees before the need for validation. You are not bound to the woman, you are bound to the belief you must prove something. It is as though every abandonment triggers a desperate attempt to correct an old injustice, to finally prove your worth. But the truth is, no one outside can give you the stamp that is missing within. When you grasp this, you begin to see the subtle manipulation at play in many relationships. Not necessarily her conscious manipulation, but the manipulation of your own brain, linking pain to pleasure, rejection to desire, absence to value. And as long as you cannot see the pattern, you keep chasing after it, mistaking suffering for proof of love. But when clarity arrives, the illusion dissolves. You realize you no longer need to beg to be chosen. The choice that matters has always been yours. The unexpected revelation. You are not tied to the person, but to the character you created of her. This is the revelation that cuts deepest, because it forces you to admit that most of your suffering has little to do with who she truly was. What hurts is not losing the flesh and blood woman, but the idealized version you built in your mind. You did not cry for her. You cried for the fantasy of redemption you believed she would bring. The male mind has a tendency to fill in the blanks with imagination. When a woman sparks desire, a man often does not only see the person before him, but projects onto her the role he wants fulfilled. If you needed care, she became the carer. If you needed admiration, she became the silent admirer. If you longed for redemption, she became the symbol of a fresh start. Yet all of this was a psychic construction, a character born of expectation, not reality. And here is where the wound grows sharper. Because when she leaves, you do not just lose a relationship. You lose the myth you created, the promise that she was the key to fixing what was broken inside you. That is why absence feels unbearable. The character you invented was flawless. She offered exactly what you believed you lacked. But the real woman never had the obligation to sustain that fantasy. And when reality clashed with projection, pain became inevitable. Jung called this projection of the shadow. What we fail to recognize in ourselves, we attempt to see in others. And when the other leaves, it is not only them who depart, it is also the part of us we had placed in them. The emptiness that remains is the brutal return of what was never theirs, but always ours. Hard to accept, but liberating. You did not lose a woman, you lost an illusion. This understanding changes everything. As long as you think the pain comes from her, you will keep trying to fix it by winning her back, as though she were the missing piece. But when you see the pain stems from the fantasy you created, you realize there is no one to beg from, no character to rescue, only you, facing the mirror of your own need. And here is the turning point. If you suffered not from reality, but from idealization, then true freedom does not lie in regaining the woman. but in letting go of the character. When you release the character, you release the illusion that someone outside can save you. That does not mean denying the beauty of what you lived, but recognizing that what you projected was a fiction fueled by need. And every fiction, no matter how compelling, must one day end. This ending, however, need not be seen as failure, but as revelation. For when you grasp that you were never bound to the real person, but to the story you told yourself, you create space for a stronger awareness. An awareness that no longer seeks redemption outside, but finds presence within. An awareness that understands no human being exists to complete another. The character dissolves, and with it dissolves the need to live from illusion. The practical consequence, the price of not letting go, is losing yourself. When you insist on holding on to a relationship that has already ended, you are not merely clinging to memories, you are draining your own vital energy. It is like bleeding in silence. The body remains standing, but the soul seeps away, consumed by a persistence that returns nothing. The loss of a woman may hurt, but the loss of oneself is fatal. Many men fail to notice this because it unfolds slowly. First, sleepless nights. Then, the loss of appetite. Then, indifference to other areas of life. Work loses meaning. Friends feel distant. Hobbies no longer bring joy. The heart becomes obsessed with regaining what is gone, and everything else fades into the background. The world keeps turning, but the man trapped in this cycle feels as though life has lost its weight. At this stage, the fight is no longer for her, but against inner erosion. Each attempt to grasp what cannot be held wears you down further. Every unanswered message, every memory replayed, every hope for return takes another piece of your strength. Without noticing, your life becomes nothing but the reflection of what you lost, instead of the expression of what you could still build. You must see the hidden cost of this insistence. The man who cannot let go lives in permanent scarcity. He becomes vulnerable to manipulation, dependent on scraps of attention, willing to bargain away his own dignity for the faintest sign of closeness, and the more he yields, the further he drifts from himself. This is not just emotional pain, it is a true alienation from the power of choice. This alienation is dangerous because it makes identity depend on absence. You stop being someone who acts and become someone who waits. The future ceases to be creation and turns into the endless continuation of a past that will not return. In this state, every day is the quiet draining of your vitality. It is not living, it is resisting the weight of a loss never truly accepted. But once you recognize this price, clarity arrives like a sharp blade. Clinging to someone who is gone is not an act of love, but of self-abandonment. That recognition is painful, but it is also the first step of liberation. For from the moment you understand what is truly at stake, you realize the choice was never between having her or not, but between losing yourself or preserving yourself. The practical consequence of not letting go is not merely to go on suffering. It is losing the ability to choose again. And that is the gravest loss, for it keeps you hostage to the past. The man who cannot release lives as a shadow of himself, bound to an echo that never answers. But the man who learns to let go discovers that even in emptiness, there is room for rebirth. The symbolic turning point. Letting go is the most masculine act of invisible power. Saying goodbye is not giving up, not defeat, not surrender. It is silently taking control of your story. When you let go, you are not abandoning a woman. You are freeing yourself from the idea that you need someone else to remain whole. And in that invisible yet powerful act, you reclaim what truly matters, yourself. The man who learns to let go does not become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, he becomes aware that life cannot be reduced to one single figure, no matter how intense it was. He understands strength is not found in clinging to what dissolves, but in allowing life's current to reveal what is meant to stay. Letting go is not denying the pain, but embracing it as part of transformation. This symbolic turning point has a profound effect. Because when you let go, something unexpected happens. The energy once trapped in obsession returns to you. The mind grows clearer, the body lighter, the spirit steadier. Her absence remains a fact, but no longer a burden. The emptiness ceases to be a prison and becomes space. And in that space, you discover more life waiting to be lived than you ever imagined. And here lies the paradox few understand. When you let go, you are not closing doors. You are opening possibilities. It is not about waiting for her to return, but about allowing destiny to act without your manipulation or begging. If she does return, it will be because she sees in you something greater than need. She sees a man who stood tall despite loss. And if she never returns, you are no longer bound to the need of being rescued by anyone. Letting go is, therefore, an act of sovereignty. It is looking at the pain and saying, I recognize you, but I do not let you define me. It is choosing not to be enslaved by memories or imprisoned by expectations. It is living with the clarity that true masculinity is not measured by the number of conquests, but by the capacity to remain whole when everything seems to collapse. This invisible power is not displayed in grand gestures. It does not shout, it does not need recognition. It manifests in the calm of a man walking unchained. The man who lets go does not need to prove anything to anyone, because he has already understood the only judgment that matters is the one made before his own mirror. And in that mirror, he no longer sees a broken man, but someone who endured the pain and emerged greater. You walked this path, believing loss was the end, but now you see it was only the beginning of something larger. The pain that felt unbearable revealed itself as the echo of old wounds. The addiction to being chosen showed itself as the invisible prison controlling your relationships. The idealized character dissolved before your eyes, exposing the illusion behind the suffering. And by confronting the cost of holding on, you realized the only real choice was reclaiming yourself. This journey is neither simple nor swift. It demands silence, confrontation, courage to let the masks you created fall away. But it is in this very process that a new kind of power is born. The power of letting go, not as one who gives up, but as one who decides to remain whole in the face of life's impermanence. That is the act that transforms ordinary men into conscious men. The emptiness that once seemed an enemy now reveals itself as fertile ground. Or absence is no longer the weight that crushes you, but the space where you can rebuild. By letting go, you do not lose. You open space to find your strength again, to recover clarity, to choose freely once more. Life ceases to be a chase after someone walking away and becomes the journey of someone who advances without needing guarantees. Here is the harsh yet liberating truth. You do not need to be chosen to exist. You do not need validation to be worthy. You do not need to beg for attention to have value. You have always been whole, but you needed loss to remember. Letting go, then, is more than detachment. It is the silent proclamation of your sovereignty. And when this awareness takes root, everything changes. You no longer fear solitude, because you understand solitude is not absence, but space for self. You no longer cling to the past, because you recognize life only flows forwards. You no longer beg for love, because you understand love that must be begged for was never love at all. And in this new stance, what was once a wound becomes a scar of power. If one day she returns, let it be because she sees in you the strength of a man who does not need her to live. If she never does, let it be because you continue forward, knowing life holds encounters, paths and possibilities far beyond what your pain once allowed you to see. Because in the end, what you discovered is simple and final. Losing someone does not mean losing yourself, but holding on to someone who has already gone always means losing yourself. And now, in this silence that is not emptiness but fullness, you can choose to walk as a man who does not beg, does not crawl, does not implore. A man who understands that letting go is not the end. It is the beginning of true freedom.